Shabbat Shalom. So how's everyone's week been? Good? It's been a bit of a week here, and for all of us, I want to talk today a little bit about trauma and what trauma is, how we move beyond it. I was reading, having for a couple weeks, a book that's just come out about the pandemic and the trauma that we are all still grappling with from that moment, that it's present in all of our lives. There's been trauma in our lives and the lives of our brothers and sisters in Israel and here since October 7th, all of which, in the grand scheme of things, makes the trauma that we as a community faced this last week seem small, but still trauma nonetheless for all of us. And as we think about ways of dealing with tragedy when it happens, ways of dealing with this, there is a beautiful, if dark, moment in the parsha that we read today that I think can elucidate some of what we're feeling right now. Now, the example in the Torah is quite severe, and I'm not equating the death of children to things that are going on. I wanted to point out, though, that as Aaron's sons, at the beginning of the Parsha, they bring a strange fire, whatever this Eish Zara is, into the Mishkan, and the fire consumes them both, and they die. And as this happens, God talks to Moses and to Aaron, and Moses and Aaron each respond in their own way to the death of their sons and nephews, respectively. And Moses, the first words out of his mouth are, this is what God meant by the saying, through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all of the people. He quotes a verse of the Torah, and he says, this death of these two priests, these two young men, that elucidates a verse to me. And in this moment, we see a very real reaction to trauma, which is trying to find meaning. Looking at something horrible when it happens and trying to categorize it into a box that makes it feel safer, makes it feel comfortable. No, that happened because, statistically speaking, crime in this country is da-da-da-da-da. Oh, no, that happened because, and I can explain it away, or, it teaches me a lesson. There's a moral of the story now. Something horrible happened, but I learned from it, so that makes it okay. And it's not a terrible way to approach things. It's perhaps significant maybe that Moses is the uncle, not the father in this situation. Maybe being removed is more helpful to get to that place with it. But when trauma happens in our lives, again, whether it's writ large or writ small, we want to try to find some lessons, some meaning from it. We can look at the world and say, well, this was bad, but it brought us all together. We learned some things. We learned from the posting on the internet after what happened at our synagogue that apparently Mark Hamill and Mia Farrow and Olaf the Snowman are on our side, so thank heaven for that. But Aaron, the father of Nadav and Abihu, he reacts differently. Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. Moses gives this lovely little parable, a little moral of the story. This is what happened. This is what we learned from a verse. Okay, great. Vayidom Aharon. Silence. And in that silence, we can imagine any number of things going on for Aaron in that moment. And different commentaries give us different ideas. Dan Yitzchak Abarbanel says that this was shock. That he actually writes, Aaron's heart had become like a lifeless stone, and he couldn't even find words to speak. And that happens when we're in shock and we're in trauma. We can't find words to say anything. And that's okay. Other rabbis say, no, of course Aaron mourned. Of course he wept. Of course he cried. Of course he was angry. He just did all of that off camera. And by the time we see him, Vayidom Aharon, it's more of a stoicism of silence. And that's possible as well. And that's a reaction also to tragedy when it happens. It's also possible that he's just taking a minute of reflection and thinking before he can move on. Because essentially, that is then the next thing that's being asked of them is to move on. Now, God's reaction to this whole thing is actually interesting as well. The first words God says after the death of Nadav and Abihu is, I have a new law for everyone. Priests cannot be intoxicated when they go into the Mishkan to offer the sacrifices. So, what does every single commentary infer from this? What were Nadav and Abihu? They must have been drunk, right? Because otherwise, why make a law saying right after this happens that priests can't have anything to drink or be intoxicated when they go offer the sacrifices? And this is also a response to trauma. We want to make a rule so that it never happens again. Right? What do we need to do? What systems do we need to change? Where do we need to put a camera now? How do we need to call people? What do we need to do to make sure this never, ever, ever, ever happens again? That is a fair and good reaction to trauma as well. It might not be the initial emotional reaction of Moshe and Aaron, but it is important to make sure that these things don't happen again and that rules or laws happen to protect people. And then, finally, about 10 verses after Nadav and Abihu are killed, Moses spoke to Aaron and said, don't forget your remaining sons, Eleazar and Itamar. Take the meal offering that is left over from God's offerings by the fire, eat it beside the altar, for it is the most holy. Essentially, Moses is saying to Aaron, what? It's time to go back to work. You have an important job to do. You have other children as well. It's not negating grief. It's not negating suffering. It's not negating dealing with those things, but saying that at a certain time, certain moment, the holy work that Aaron and his sons have to do has to continue for the people, and so they need to get back to it. And we see this whenever, again, whatever trauma we're speaking about in our life, be it large, be it small, we know all of these reactions. There are times where we have nothing to say. There are times we can't think of a thing. There's times where we are so upset, we are so despairing, our heart is like a lifeless stone. And we just have to wait to find it again. And there are times where we can make meaning out of something and say, oh, this is why this happened, or for me, this is the lesson that I'm going to take moving forward. We have to fix it to try to protect people and make sure things don't happen again. And then eventually, we move on. And we keep going because we're fabulously resilient and we have that strength and ability. Then the question is, as we keep going, what do we do? What do we do with the trauma that's still there? It's still very real. I don't know about you. I'm never going to be able to get the image of the swastika on our sign out of my head for as long as I live. It's always going to be there. So what do we do moving forward? In this, I think we see an example from the holiday that the Chazan just beautifully announced, the month that it's about to start. If we look at the Haggadah of Pesach, which is essentially our people's way of keeping a traumatic experience alive and passing it down to the next generation, for good and for bad. We Jews have baked into our DNA that we are an oppressed people, that we were once an oppressed people. And that's because of the Middle Ages, and it's because of 50 years ago, and it's because of 2,000 years ago and Pharaoh and slavery, and we remind ourselves of this every single year, that we were once slaves, and that our people have trauma. So what do we do with it? Well, there's two avenues that I see in the Haggadah. One happens around the fourth cup, when we open the door for Elijah. But what really is going on there in that moment is we say, Shvo chamatcha el hagoyim. Pour your wrath out on the non-Jews. This is a real response, to take this trauma and carry it with us as anger for people who were not with us, who are not here for us. We say, this Prayer, which by the way, is not in our oldest Haggadot. It's added around the 12th century. It's probably added by Jews after Crusaders had made their way through Germany, murdering Jews as they went. Interestingly, you should let other people tell you what's interesting. Interestingly, it's added not by the Jews of Germany, but by the Jews of France. Not by the people who were a part of it, but by people who heard about it. They heard about these murders, and they were furious. And they didn't know where to go with their anger, and they didn't know where to go with their hurt or their pain. And so they wrote, God, go get them. And they sang it every single year. And later Haggadot take it out. We in America usually don't sing it. We open the door and we sing about Elijah instead. But it's still in most of our Haggadot. The idea that trauma leads to anger is something we have to acknowledge, because it's very, very real. But it's not the only thing that we can do. Because the other avenue out is Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves. As we begin Magid, we sing about that we were slaves in Israel. We tell that story, and we base that section on verses in the Torah, which remind us, by the way, to do good for other people. You shall not wrong the stranger, ki gerim hayitem, because you were strangers in the land of Israel. You need to welcome the stranger, ki gerim hayitem, because you were strangers in the land of Israel. This piece of the Haggadah calls us not to anger, but to understanding, to empathy. To say we know what it was to be hurt. We know what it was to be scared. We know what it is to be a minority. And we take all of those feelings, all of that trauma, and we do our best to find understanding for those who are hurt and scared and minorities today. Where can we extend a hand? Because thank God we have the ability to extend one. And where can we look to see who we can help? This is an incredibly hard thing to do, especially when the trauma is fresh. We've been trying to do it for 2,000 years in the Haggadah. It's still hard to do, let alone now. But it's very important to think again, personally, what are the failings and flaws that I have that I can use to try to find compassion in others for their failings and flaws? And nationally, we were strangers. We have been helped. We have been helped by others. We've been helped by non-Jews. What can we do to extend our hands, to find empathy and understanding? It is so hard, but it is so important. And the rabbis give us a little clue on the way to finding that understanding, or the way to pushing that way. And the rabbis in the Mishnah say something pretty astute about human psychology. They say, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, aveira goreret aveira. One mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. One aveira, one sin leads to another sin. Right? You do one good thing, it's easier to do the next good thing, and the next good thing after that. To put it better, to keep going with our Haggadah, this is all Chad Gadya, my friends. One little goat that a guy buys, through chain reaction of events, affects the nature of God. That's the message of this song that we're all going to sing. And it's got a beautiful tune, and it's a lovely part, and it's when the kids are up, but it's deep. Chad Gadya tells this story of a small action that can lead through a series of events to wonderful or different or big or large things. We saw that this week. One act of dumb hatred sparked thousands of acts of kindness and unity and solidarity, and it has been amazing to witness and to be a part of. And we thank God for all of the people who've reached out, for all of the people from not our community who have shown their love and support, and I thank God for everyone in our community for your strength and your resilience and your support through all of this. One little act sparks another, and then another, and then another, and then another. And it's amazing that this act of hate turned to something of love. Now it's our turn to be a part of the chain and spread that act of love that we felt the support to more people and to other people, and to keep it going. We all have trauma in our lives, our community and our people. We can go to a place of anger with it. That's real, that's there. We also need to try to find understanding and compassion That's hard, but all we need is to start with one little step. Shabbat Shalom.